My sister climbed into my bed. No, seriously, into my bed. With my husband. They thought I'd just step aside and watch them start their new life. But I decided that this show would end on sime terms. And trust me, they won't like it. My name is Sarah, I'm 27, and I'd say my life was pretty normal. You know, typical, a 9-to-5 job, a bit of drama with friends, Friday dinners with my husband Jake. Everything was smooth until one terrible day turned everything upside down. Seriously, I didn't expect such a twist. But before I dive into the mess, let me give you some background on who's who here. My younger sister Emily, yeah, that's where the fun starts. Emily was always the golden child, always on a pedestal in front of our parents. Picture this. A blonde beauty who never makes mistakes, always gets straight A's, and is first in any competition or contest. The classic favorite, and I was always in her shadow. Me? I was more like the dark horse. Not as glamorous, not as interesting, just an add-on to the great and mighty Emily. Honestly, I'd been sick of it for a while, but I kept quiet. Then came that day. A day like a bolt from the blue. I come home from work, hoping to just collapse on the couch and tune out the world. I open the door, and what do I see? No, you won't believe it. Jake, my husband, and Emily, the golden girl, sitting in our home in towels. In towels, seriously. For a moment, I thought, okay, this is some kind of bizarre joke. Because, come on, in what reality does this happen? I didn't even have time to process it before Emily threw me a smug smile, like this was just a funny little moment in life and not the completed destruction of my marriage and sanity. Have you ever felt like your entire world is falling apart and there's nothing you can do about it? That was that moment for me. My heart stopped, my thoughts were a jumbled mess, and my legs wouldn't move. I'll be honest, I stood there like a frozen idiot, not knowing what to say or do. What the actual heck is going on? That's all that kept running through my head, but I couldn't get the words out. I just turned and walked out, on autopilot. Emily, of course, followed. Like nothing had happened, she tried to get defensive with me, saying, "Oh, it was just an accident, calm down." Yeah, right, an accident. Sure, it's not an accident when your sister is sleeping with your husband, but you know what was the wildest part? Neither Jake nor Emily showed an ounce of guilt on their faces. It was like they were saying, well, things happen. Don't make this into a drama. That's when it hit me. I wasn't living in the real world anymore. I was in some trashy TV show where I was the main victim. And you know what I did? While they were running after me, I just smiled and thought, well, I didn't start this game, but I sure shall will finish it. And that was just the beginning of the chaos I was preparing. Have you ever thought things couldn't get worse? Well, spoiler alert, they can. There I was, standing frozen, watching this circus, trying to make sense of what was happening. And they just stood there, as if nothing had happened. For a minute, the world stopped. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat, like a drumbeat in the background of dead silence. I was boiling inside. Saying I was angry doesn't even begin to cover it. This rage, it filled my whole body. You know when you're so ready to explode, but all you can do is freeze? That was me in that moment. Emily was the first to open her mouth. Oh my God, Sarah, it's not what you think. Really? Not what I think? So I'm not seeing my little sister, fresh out of the shower in a towel in my house with my husband standing right in front of her looking exactly the same? And that's when I snapped. But it wasn't the kind of snapping where you scream and throw a fit. No, I was too angry for that. My anger was as cold. I couldn't even respond. I just turned and headed for the door. And those two idiots started chasing after me like puppies. I stepped outside, and for the first time in a while, I felt so cold that it gave me a weird sense of control. I stood there, breathing, trying to get my mind in order. And then, of course, they came running out after me. Jake, predictably, started with something like, "Sarah, listen, we need to talk." "Oh, really? We need to talk? I just caught you with my sister like this, but sure, let's talk it over." And you know what was the most surprising part? Not an ounce of regret in there, yes. Nothing. Zero. It was as if this was just another random day. Sure, a bit awkward, but nothing we can't get past. Like things like this just happen sometimes. That's when it hit me. They didn't see anything wrong with what they did, didn't understand why I was about to explode. That's what shocked me the most. They were both so relaxed. Emily even dared to say, "Come on, Sarah, don't make this a big deal." Seriously? I'm supposed to just brush this off like it's some small misunderstanding? Wow, seems like my definition of betrayal is very different from theirs. That's when I realized I couldn't trust them anymore. This was one of those moments where suddenly everything becomes crystal clear. When you realize the game is over. Right then and there, I decided that no one would ever make a fool of me again. A few days later, after I had begun to calm down from all this drama, as if on schedule, they decided it was time to talk. Of course, in their minds, a few days of silence should have turned everything into a fluke that could be discussed over coffee. Like, let's just forget that they both betrayed me and go back to our normal lives, right? They chose a cafe. Yes, a cafe. Like the classic place to discuss family betrayals. Don't tell me you didn't know. I walked in and immediately saw them sitting at a table. Emily, with her usual smug smile, sat across from Jake, who was nervously twirling a spoon in his hands. I mentally prepared myself, took a deep breath, and headed towards them as if this was just another casual meeting. But inside, I was ready to destroy them. As soon as I sat down, Jake started. "Sarah, please, let's talk about this. It was a mistake, okay? I love you. I really do." "Oh, of course. I love you? Seriously? You love me so much that you managed to get intubed with my sister? How sweet." But I stayed quiet, just staring at him, waiting to see what else he would say. He kept mumbling something about how nothing really happened, and how it was all just an accident, something that didn't matter. I stared at him, not believing my ears. Jake was never the brightest guy, but this was a whole new level of stupidity. I could practically see how every word was digging him deeper into a hole he was burying himself in. Then Emily, still holding his hand, yes, still holding his hand, can you believe it? Took another step into the abyss and added, "Sarah, you're overreacting. It's not like we were planning to hurt you." She was smiling. No, seriously, she was smiling. It was like watching someone who truly believes they are the center of the universe and that everyone should revolve around them. She wasn't apologizing, not even showing a hint of guilt. No, all she was doing was showing me how little I mattered to her. And you know what? It wasn't even surprising. In that moment, I realized that these two just didn't get how badly they'd betrayed me. And that's when it became clear to me. They were just two idiots, not even worth my hatred. I looked at both of them and thought, okay guys, keep playing, but now we play by my rules. On the outside, I seemed calm. Jake probably even thought his pathetic attempts to fix things might work. He tried to grab my hand again, but I pulled away. All I could do was sit there and smile back at them. It was as fake as their explanations. Deep down, I already knew I wouldn't forgive them. But I didn't yet realize just how deep they had both sunk. This wasn't just cheating. This was a betrayal of such magnitude that everything in my life was going to change. And you know what? I started planning my revenge. Oh, it wasn't going to be just any revenge. It was going to be a show where they would end up with nothing. I didn't tell them that, of course. Let them think everything was moving along as usual, that I'd eventually calm down. But I already knew they didn't understand who they were dealing with. So, they sit there in front of me, trying to explain themselves like a couple of guilty kids, while I just sat there, already imagining how their perfect little world was going to crumble. This time, I would have the last smile. After that ridiculous cafe meeting where they both tried to justify themselves, it became clear to me there was no point in talking anymore. Trust? Shattered. The relationship? On the verge of collapse. So I decided that since they thought they could walk all over me so easily, I needed to show them who was really in control. First thing I did was decide to spy on them. No, not in the sense of trailing them in dark sunglasses, although that would have been fun. I started gathering information, carefully and quietly. I grabbed Jake's phone. He never changed his password. That naive fool. And that's when the real game began. You know, people always think that if they delete a few messages, their secrets are safe. Well, not quite. I started finding bits of conversations with Emily. They were discussing how they would start fresh in another city. Oh yes, moving. Like, let's just run away and be happy together as if no one will notice. Oh sure, like that's gonna happen, I thought. Dear owns, if anyone is starting fresh, it won't be you. The real fun began when I found out that Emily had tried. No, not just tried. She was already pulling money from our parents to fund this little escape into their new life. She claimed she'd found a great opportunity and didn't have stable income yet. Of course she didn't. She was busy sleeping with my husband instead of working for her new life. And that's when it hit me. Not only did she ruin my life, but she was lying to our parents too. How noble. But all of this only strengthened my resolve. This was my moment to strike. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to run off with my parents' money. I started gathering all those cute little conversations, taking screenshots of their plans, saving every message, every detail. They were senile, discussing everything in their messengers, thinking they were in control. But there's what they didn't know. The game had only just begun, and I was the director. So, I headed straight to a lawyer to start the divorce process. Honestly, that was one of the most satisfying moments I'd had in a long time. I sat in the office, reading through their texts and imagining their faces when they realized everything was falling apart. But for me, this was just the beginning. The wow jackpot was yet to come. All this time, they thought they could just ride off into the sunset, taking whatever they wanted. But I had a different idea. While they were dreaming of a new life, I was quietly and discreetly preparing to ruin everything they were building. Because, you know, if you want revenge, you have to be prepared. And I was prepared. When I realized that a simple divorce would be too soft for these two, a better idea came to mind. Revenge. Not some cheap little affair, but something that would make them feel every blow. My plan was simple, but at the same time elaborate. If they think they can start a new life together, I'll make sure that life begins with chaos and debt. First, I focused on Jake. Have you ever met people who act like they have everything under control, but their life is actually a complete mess? That was Jake. Behind his self-assurance, he was hiding dirty secrets. And as it turned out, he'd been doing a pretty good job of it. At least from Emily. He was in debt, not just a couple of credit cards, but real debt. The kind he was shitting like a clueless teenager hiding his failing grades. Of course, Emily had no idea. She always thought Jake was a real man who always gets things done. You know the type. But you know what's even funnier? Those debts. They were the result of his useless investments and, surprise, shady gambling. Genius, right? He was basically a ticking time bomb. And I, of course, was going to set it off. I started gathering documents and facts, checking his accounts, hidden transfers, and when I realized I had everything I needed, I filed the paperwork. Oh yes, that felt sweet. The court ruling froze his bank accounts. Have you ever had your bank account frozen? It's like being tied up and thrown into the water. You just can't breathe. Jake didn't even realize his life was falling apart right under his nose. This wasn't just some random move. It was the first big blow I struck. Stripping them of their money for their new life was like taking away their protection before the storm. Because, you know, they thought they could just take off and start fresh. But how do you start fresh when your accounts are empty? And there are debts you didn't even know about on the horizon. When the bank accounts were frozen, I sat at home, sipping my wine, and pictured Jake's face when he realized he couldn't withdraw a single penny. Imagine his face when he realized the money they were counting on for their future was unavailable. It wasn't just a financial blow. It was a blow to their egos, to their illusion of control. But you know what was the sweetest part? Emily still didn't know. She thought they were on their way to a bright future, while Jake was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown trying to figure out how to tell her, "Honey, we've got a little problem with the finances." Honestly, that moment was one of the most satisfying, because when it all came crashing down, I'd be there to watch them both scramble, and that would be just the beginning of my game. Emily continued living in her sweet little illusion, thinking she and Jake had everything under control and that life was going according to plan. Poor thing thought they'd soon be off to their new, wonderful life. Meanwhile, Jake was already on the edge of a nervous breakdown. And you know what he did? He came to my house. Yes, that's right. He came to my house, as if I were his lifeline. I'm standing in my living room, and there he is, showing up at my doorstep, looking like he hadn't slept or eaten in a week. It was a sight. He was clearly panicking, and as soon as I opened the door, he started, "Sarah, please, I need to talk. This is all just a mistake, okay? None of this was supposed to happen." I looked at him with the same expression as if he'd come to borrow money from me. He was on the verge of tears. And honestly, it was comical. "Are you serious?" I thought. He was trying to convince me that Emily was not who she seems to be, and that all of this was just a mistake, like fate had somehow intervened. Sure, Jake, that's exactly how it is. It was just fate that put you in bed with my sister. Of course, I was too cold for all this nonsense. The only thing that really interested me was watching their world fall apart, and I certainly wasn't going to help him swim out of this mess. So, I just stood there with my arms crossed, listening to his whining. Was he hoping I'd join his game and feel sorry for him? Yeah, no. All I could do was mentally count the minutes until I could finally turn around and end this farce. But you know what came next? I decided it was time for the second move. If freezing the accounts was just the overture, now it was time for the real finale. I went to our parents. Oh yes, that's when the real circus began. Calmly and coolly, I explained to them that their beloved daughter, their golden girl Emily, had basically stolen money from their family fund. Surprise, surprise, I thought. My parents sat there in shock, like their world had just flipped upside down. They couldn't believe that their perfect daughter had done something like that. And me? I was just checking the clock, waiting for the bomb to fully go off. She did what? My dad shouted, like he'd just woken up from a coma after several months. My mom, naturally, started crying. Quite the family evening. Everything was playing out exactly as I had planned. My parents were horrified. They couldn't believe that Emily, the perfect Emily, would stoop so low. But even more importantly, they immediately cut her off financially. Guess who was no broke? Emily, of course, was furious when she found out. Her perfect picture of a new life began to crumble right before her eyes. She lost both the money and the trust of our parents. That was the second, and in my opinion, sweetest blow. Watching their carefully planned escape fall apart was priceless. I sat in my living room, sipping a glass of wine, thinking that this wasn't the end. Jake on his knees, Emily without a penny. Everything was going according to plan. Did they really think they could betray me and walk away with no consequences? Emily, my golden little sister who had been doted on all her life. This time, she wasn't the confident, smug girl who had once grinned at me across a cafe table. No. Now she stood at my doorstep, without money, without hope, and most importantly, without any pride. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. You know how it is when your life is falling apart, and you can't figure out at what point everything went wrong? That's exactly the expression she had when I opened the door. The moment our eyes met, she said, "Sarah, please, we need to talk." I stood there, unable to hide my smirk. Oh, now we need to talk? Really? I thought. Of course, we need to talk because her little affair with starting a new life didn't work out. She, humiliated and lost, was literally begging me to give back at least a piece of what she had. There it is, huh? When she stood in front of me, spilling this pathetic speech, I couldn't help but enjoy the moment. Can you blame me? Probably not. Sarah, I made a mistake, okay? I was stupid. But we are sisters. You can't just leave me like this. Her voice trembled, and there was a desperate plea in her eyes. I almost laughed in her face. Sisters? Oh yes, of course. We're sisters. You must have forgotten that when you laughed in my face, hugging my husband in my own house. I looked at her, feeling the burning satisfaction inside. You're destroying your own life, Emily. Not me. I took a deep breath and decided to savor this moment to the fullest. Do you remember that day? When I came home and caught you two? Do you remember how you laughed as if it was some stupid joke? And now what? Where's your confidence now? Emily was silent, her face turning red, and I could feel her self-esteem plummeting with every second of silence. Jake, meanwhile, was already swimming in a sea of legal troubles. My lawyer hadn't his job, and his debts were now public knowledge. He was like a rat in a maze. No way out, no hope. But with Emily, this was a special kind of pleasure. I knew she thought she could walk away clean, that our parents would always support her, that she'd always have a backup plan. But now, with nothing left, she finally realized that the game was over. I stood in front of her, and all I could think at that moment was, this was only round one, sweetheart. But I didn't say it out loud. Why ruin the finale? I let her stew in silence for a bit, soaking in every second of her humiliation. And you know what? I enjoyed it. Because this wasn't just a moment of triumph, this was the end of her delusions. Emily, I've given you enough chances. I finally broke the silence coldly. You ruined my life, tore apart our family, but the most important thing, you don't even feel guilty about it. So here's my answer. No more chances. She stared at me, unable to hold back her tears, but honestly, I didn't care. This was her downfall, and I was just there to make sure she crashed at full speed. But you know what was the sweetest part of all this? I knew it still wasn't over. There was still one final touch. So, here's how it all ended. Emily, once the confident queen of the world, eventually left town in disgrace. I heard she moved to some backwater town where no one knows her past achievements. City life turned out to be too harsh for her. Oh, what a shame. Poor, poor Emily, who thought she could destroy my life, only to end up with nothing. She left with no money, no family, and most importantly, no reputation. Jake? Well, his situation was even more amusing. The guy was so deep in debt, it seemed like his bank account had become some sort of black hole. He never managed to dig himself out of that financial chaos. Every attempt to save himself only dragged him further down. You know how it is when you're swimming against the current, but it just pulls you under? That was Jake. His lawyers gave up, creditors were on his tail, and his life turned into a soap opera that even HBO wouldn't air. Sometimes I think I should have felt some kind of satisfaction. You know, the classic, I got what I wanted. But honestly, it was something far more subtle. I realized that revenge isn't always about screaming and fighting. No, real revenge is when you sit in your favorite chair with a glass of wine and silently savor the moment, knowing that all you had to do was wait. Because life dishes out justice, just a bit more cruelly than you'd expect. And here I am, sitting on my balcony, holding a glass of wine, watching the sunset dissolve into the clouds, one thought running through my mind. So, how's life with nothing in your hands? They thought they could betray me and walk away. But as it turned out, their plan wasn't as well thought out as they believed. Now they have nothing. Emily lost everything. The money, our parents' trust, her pathetic reputation. Jake, the guy who always thought he'd come out unscathed, ended up neck-deep in debt, on the verge of bankruptcy. Their perfect picture of a new life shattered into pieces. And me? I was left alone. But it wasn't a heavy, lonely feeling. It was sweet. Because I knew no one would ever make a puppet out of me again. Yeah, sometimes justice is harsh, and I learned that firsthand. But you know, there's something truly beautiful about it. It's like a game where everyone thinks they can control the situation, but in the end, you're the only one who walks away the winner. And in moments like this, you realize all you had to do was not scream, not openly retaliate, but just watch them destroy their own lives. Cheers to that. I raise my glass and take a sip.